So the big winner in this New York Times story, this deep dive about the origins of the FBI investigation of the Trump campaign, clearly the Rolling Stones, since we now know the investigation was called Crossfire Hurricane from Jumping Jack Flair, kind of ran a correction for what it reported a year and a half ago. Certainly walked it back, and to some extent, I give the Times a lot of credit for being willing to candidly assess the flaws of a story that first ran in the closing weeks of the 2016 campaign. The gist of the story has to do with how the FBI, unbeknownst to even most people at the Justice Department, in 2016 opened this investigation, and the thing that was kind of buried was the idea that there was a government informant or two who was in contact with Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, these sort of fringe Trump campaign aides. The FBI was very aggressive in the Hillary Clinton investigation, and of course James Comey twice talked about it publicly, once when he declined prosecution, once famously or infamously when he reopened it at the end of the campaign, but barely breathed a word about, around the same period, the Trump investigation. The spin from the Bureau is, well, we were just starting, we didn't have enough evidence, but beyond that, almost everyone at the Bureau, like almost everyone in America, was convinced that Hillary Clinton was going to win, so they were more concerned about being held to account for what the Bureau did or did not do under President Hillary Clinton. And almost everyone was convinced that Trump was going to lose, so why go public with something that wouldn't matter if he was just a losing candidate? Here we are all caught in a crossfire hurricane because, like everything else, this gets embedded or tossed around in partisanship. So if you believe the FBI went too far and Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, with all of those incriminating texts, were out to get Donald Trump, then you look at this and say, well, you know what, they're just covering their butt because more evidence is going to come out. This is the spinning in advance that the Times is helping the Bureau do to help get the FBI off the hook when it comes out that they didn't follow the rules, and by the way, there never should have been a Mueller investigation. If you are in the other camp, you say that this is actually an honest look at, incomplete journalistic fact-gathering at the time, and it shows that the FBI was doing its job, but quietly, that the FBI didn't want to be perceived, and some of this is in the piece, as furthering Trump's charge, candidate Trump's charge of rigging the election, so they didn't want anybody to know about this investigation, just in case it ended up leading to nothing, and obviously it then led to something, and now we're still dealing with it in the Mueller investigation. So you'll hear a lot about this story and the spying, the alleged spying, the informant, and you'll hear a lot of spinning by both sides, which is sort of where we are in this investigation. What you won't hear that much about was the thing that the New York Times, to its credit, put in the piece, but didn't exactly make the lead, and that is the New York Times in 2018 now says the New York Times in 2016 got it wrong.
The same reason they can't indict him, they can't issue a subpoena to him. And remember, Clinton opposed a subpoena, and then he voluntarily complied. He didn't give up presidential prerogative, and then his administration wrote a memo saying they can't do that.
What about the substance of that point that he made on the subpoena?
Oh, he's completely wrong. I mean, the first subpoena issued and served on a president was by John Marshall on Thomas Jefferson in 1807. There was a subpoena served on Madison, and of course we all know about the subpoena served on President Nixon by Leon Jaworski, and the Supreme Court ruled 8-0 that the president had to obey it. Now, so he's utterly, completely wrong. And the OLC opinion, to my knowledge, only talks about whether or not you can indict a president. By the way, President Clinton didn't fight the subpoena from Judge Starr. He asked us to withdraw it and said he would come if we did. And that's what happened. We don't know if he would have fought it. I don't think he would have fought it. Now, if he is subpoenaed and invokes executive privilege, that is President Trump, and a court rules against him, he can say, like Andrew Jackson supposedly said, you've made your law, Chief Justice Marshall, now see if you can enforce it. And then the Supreme Court has said twice that orders have to be obeyed in Cooper versus Aaron and in U.S. versus Nixon. But he could say, that's interesting, I'm the president, I'm a co-equal branch, and I'm not going to do it. And then we'd have a really interesting constitutional crisis.
Our ask is complete and total denuclearization of North Korea, and it is the president's intention to achieve that. As he has said, we'll see if that works, but we're setting the conditions for a successful meeting between the two leaders. Earlier this week, but we can create conditions for real economic prosperity for the North Korean people that will rival that of the South. And that is our expectation. It won't be U.S. taxpayers. It will be American know-how, knowledge, entrepreneurs, and risk takers working alongside the North Korean people to create a robust. With respect to whether the actions of this past week with respect to the JCPOA increased anyone's risk, I think that's ludicrous. The Iranian bad behavior increased. It only increased during the time of the JCPOA was that the Iranian wealth creation fueled their malign behavior. The money that they had to go and launch missiles into Riyadh and Israel, putting Americans at risk, was provided by the economic benefits they got from the JCPOA. President Trump wants to starve them of that wealth.
So fundamentally, though, are you trying to negotiate a new nuclear deal, or are you trying to put together a coalition to defeat Iran?
We're going to put together a coalition that pushes back against not only Iran's nuclear program, which, by the way, Margaret, they still deny. No Iranian leader has admitted they had a weapons program, and the facts are now public that they did. They ought to at least be honest about that. But it's not going to just be the nuclear file. It will be their missile program. It will be their effort to build Hezbollah. It'll be their threats against Israel. It'll be the work that they're doing in Yemen to launch missiles into Saudi Arabia, for goodness sakes. This is the activity that the Iranian regime has undertaken during the JCPOA. We're going to make a shift. We're going to deny them the benefit of the economic wealth that has been created and put real pressure so that they'll stop the full scale of the sponsorship of terrorism with which they've been engaged in these past years.
In recent days, Hamas terrorists, backed by Iran, have incited attacks against Israeli security forces and infrastructure. That is violence that should occupy our attention too. The common thread in all of this is the destabilizing conduct of the Iranian regime. I asked my colleagues here in the Security Council, who among us would accept this type of activity on your border? No one would. No country in this chamber would act with more restraint than Israel has. In fact, the records of several countries here today suggest they would be much less restrained. Those who suggest that the Gaza violence has anything to do with the location of the American embassy are sorely mistaken. Rather, the violence comes from those who reject the existence of the State of Israel in any location. Such a motivation, the destruction of a United Nations member state, is so illegitimate as to not be worth our time in the Security Council, other than the time it takes to denounce it.